Of the Senteon and CIS webinar series, a deep dive into the CIS benchmarks. I'm your host, Zach Kromenkowski, over from Senteon, joined by my co-host, Rich McGraw from CIS.
Hi, everybody.
2 weeks in a row, Rich. You're breaking records. And we're joined by our special guest.
It's three, Zach. One was live in Palo Alto.
All right. Last week was live. Yep. And we're also joined by Steb and Rob of NetForward Corp, MSP out of Wisconsin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Well, thank you for joining us, guys. I know, Steb, I've worked with you for the last couple of years talking about Senteon, and I know Rob and I both love New Orleans. Me living there in the last few years, we had some good backstage conversation. But Rob, you are the owner of NetForward. You come with a system administrator background. You've really been through the weeds of Windows internals. So very excited to talk about this with you. And Steb, you have kind of the flip side. You work directly with all those customers, growing the business, and really excited to hear your perspective and maybe if these types of topics even come up in the customer-facing things. But instead of me introducing yourselves, do you guys just mind kicking off and introducing yourself a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I'll go first. Steb Sheely. I work on the kind of sales and account management side of NetForward. I like to say when it comes to the extremely technical details, like we're going to talk about today, I'm just the big dumb sales guy, and I can talk to
that, brother.
I'm not very big. That's true. But no, I mean, my focus is all about building and maintaining those relationships, and you can't do that if you don't keep your clients secure. So with that, I'll pass it off to Rob.
I'm Rob Richardson. I own NetForward. I've been doing system administration since late 90s, maybe. Too long. This is my dog Ian. He helps on most of my technical questions. He's boned up for today on all these topics, so I'm sure he'll let you know what's going on.
And we have a third guest right there on your lap.
Yeah, that's what I want to know about.
Ian. That's what he's there for. I've been doing system administration, consulting, MSP work, just making sure clients are stable and secure, because my goal is so that they do their business good and we can grow with their growth of their business.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And talking about, the growth of your client's business, this is something we talk about in a lot of our episodes, is that MSP having the need to scale and continue to be able to support as their existing clients grow. So I know I worked with Rob. You guys are very proactive. You want to get ahead of the security measures. Could you kind of introduce a little bit of how you work with your clients and when they grow, what it takes for you to scale your solutions and how you make that maybe a repeatable process?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the syscontrols help a lot with that. It all starts with having a process in place. And even for ourselves internally, when we were looking at the syscontrols and implementing them, we had a lot of the various safeguards in place, but we realized that we didn't have some of those processes that back it up. And without good processes, the cybersecurity posture that you have just kind of all goes to the wayside if somebody leaves or moves into a different position. And so I think that's one thing that the syscontrols do very well. You can also, with the 3 different implementation groups, right size what your implementation is based on the needs of your business. And so they've been very helpful for us in helping to find which solutions make the most sense for our customers.
That's awesome, Steb. I love hearing you say that. From my position at the Center for Internet Security, we're always trying to expand the amount of people using the Center for Internet Security controls, which is a prioritized framework broken up into the implementation groups that Steb identified. And, we have very, very wide adoption. And for those organizations looking to comply to any of the various regulatory frameworks, it's a leg up on all of that. So we talk about benchmarks, the Center for Internet Security benchmarks on this show, but I like to bring up the Center for Internet Security controls as well on each episode. So we got to that early. Yay. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. And And Steb, clearly you're pretty well in tune with this, and sounds like even the concept of CIS maybe happens externally with customers. Where did this, I guess, North Star framework really come from? Was that kind of top down? Rob, is this something you used in your early days learning the space? Is this something newer that you're now talking to customers, or how does CIS play a role, and when did this really start?
I would say I've had the idea of some of these things, but not a structured way to implement it. Okay. So, for instance, we had some of these processes around, but we didn't ever have them written because it wasn't a priority, And then Steb introduced us to CIS, and we're like, oh yeah, we should probably document some things because when you're on that call at 3 a.m, it doesn't really matter how much you've practiced it. It's nice to have a list to go down and
right.
What to do.
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, really, I think this really started for us in 2019 when one of our clients had a ransomware incident.
Sure.
We were very lucky with that ransomware incident because we had reliable backups, and that was kind of our gospel, prior to looking at adopting any form of framework, was make sure your backups are good. Make sure you're following that 3-2-1 best practice, and those backups saved us when that ransomware incident occurred. Awesome. That being said, it was still a very painful day and weekend. We were lucky where it happened on a Friday. We had the client restored on a Monday, but that was not fun. There were many, many hours for each and every member of our staff involved in getting that client back online. Even myself, I remember being on a call for 10 hours that day. And I wasn't the one fixing this stuff, but I was helping out in whatever way I possibly could, so it was not a fun day.
The big buzz this week, and for those that watch the replays, it's September 13th, 2023. The MGM casino was taken down for a couple of days. Yeah. And there's been very little information that has come out upon what attack method was used, but they were taken down for a couple of days. And, imagine the cybersecurity sophistication that the MGM casinos have in their environment. And, someone found a seam in the back, so to speak. So it'll be interesting to see is exposed on what happened there.
Yeah, you guys remember the Move It thing that happened 2 months ago, maybe?
No, just a couple of days ago with MGM. Their ATMs and their
hotel keys and everything, man. They got completely shut down. But I want to expand a little bit because you have a perspective that I don't think everyone in our audience really gets to hear about. Because as MSP owners and people listening, there are plenty of these ransomware stories. You deal with it, you recover with it. But could you kind of talk to us about how you explain to the customer what was going on and you managed emotions and expectations? Like, I would intuitively think maybe they blamed you at first, like you guys should have been protecting us. Like, how do you navigate those waters with a customer?
Yeah, so when this particular incident happened, the biggest thing is that we were in constant communication with them at all times.
Called him the CEO every hour,
to the point where the CEO told Rob, "I'm tired of hearing from you. Stop calling me." And so I mean that's one of our MOs anyways when it comes to building client relationships is keep the client informed, make sure that they know what's going on. So we actually were very lucky when this happened that the client did not blame us. We had identified that there were certain needs and gaps in their cybersecurity posture, and even from an infrastructure standpoint, that there were certain things that they could do to build in more redundancy to help get systems back online. And so by having frequent reviews with them of their current state and where they should be, and trying to figure out what made the most sense for their budget, they were already aware of a lot of these things happening. Or existing as gaps in their current practice. And so when the event happened, it just solidified a lot of those items and made them more important, and made them recognize the importance of taking the next step.
That's really key that you were able to have that trusted advisor role and you were ticking down a prioritized list, and unfortunately the bad guys do find the seams, and it sounds like you guys were doing everything right, as well as the customer, trying to get after it, but budget and time is limited. So these things do happen, and it was great you had a really solid recovery.
I think that word you said, there's a good opportunity for me to pass off to Rob one of our company policies.
Oh yes, I have a series of books that I have everyone read that have nothing to do with technology. One of them is Trusted Advisor, which is exactly how to take a trusted advisor role with your clients and have them actually trust that what you're saying is important and they need to listen in a way that doesn't raise their hackles or defenses and stuff. Super important as an IT person, I think, to have that line of communication, because if you're not trusted by the client, they're going to go to someone they trust.
Well, and they're also gonna point the finger right at you for that incident, and you identified that wasn't the case in this situation.
Mm-hmm. And even if it is your fault, you got to be able to own it and just say, we screwed up, and here's what we're going to do to fix it.
And that's where Senteon comes in to help. Make sure you have all those baselines correct, right, Zach?
Yeah, if Senteon wasn't in place in the first time, definitely. No, that's really good perspective, and it sounds like this incident really expedited your efforts to begin following that standard and following CIS. I was putting together from the story, and I know a little bit about your business model and that transition, but today when you work with clients, existing customers, new customers, is CIS part of that conversation? Does the end client ever hear that verbiage?
Yeah, it is, and we're actually formally launching CIS controls assessments as
Nice.
a product, and really the way that our process is going to work going forward with onboarding new clients, and even for existing clients that we have, is we will be conducting a CIS controls assessment as that very first step. And that allows us to establish a baseline of how mature your cybersecurity practice is, and it gives us the ability to create a cybersecurity roadmap for you going forward.
Well, let's face it, you're the sales guy on the team, right? It's also called a project roadmap for the guy sitting next to you to get after. And that's where you identify those gaps that you expose to the customer, and that's your roadmap to start ticking down.
Yep, and I think that's the approach that we've taken. The CIS controls do a great job of listing out all of the 150.
Yeah, there's plenty.
But
you don't have to do all
for smaller companies.
You need to start with the IG1, right? So if you don't have that nailed down, you are exposed to unnecessary risk.
But even going beyond that, for someone who's just starting out in their cybersecurity journey, they could go through IG1 on their own. But still, when it comes to, obviously the CIS controls are prioritized, but if you look back at previous versions of the CIS controls, they are prioritized differently. So cybersecurity is always changing, and you have to make the right decisions that are right for your business. And so that's where we can really help, especially with those companies who are just starting out. Help them to realize what's going to be most impactful and valuable for them.
Right on. In what CIS, we are constantly evolving our content in a threat-informed way. On one of the things that we do that many people aren't necessarily aware of is the Center for Internet Security runs a security operations center for state and local government agencies funded by Homeland Security. So what we do is we collect net flow data from state and local government agencies all across the country. And we do threat analysis, threat hunting, remediation. So we have a constant view of the current threat landscape. And, we do it the best that we can with that knowledge to adjust our content and continually use the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule, to prioritize our content and keep people safe, in general.
We had an interesting thing presenting this to a client. They had recently just had a penetration test, and the consultants came in ran a pen test, told them how bad things were, and then asked for what, like $20,000 to fix it or something.
Possibly more.
Yeah.
At least they offered to fix it.
I think it was about
it was a lot of money.
I think all in $100,000 package, between their managed services and just fixing the threats that they had.
They literally sat the IT guys, across the table from them, and to their boss, told their boss how badly they were doing. And we came
That's an example of not being a trusted advisor. And I assume that they did not win that business. They obviously shared the story with you and found a better plan. If I could probably finish the story without knowing the rest.
So when we presented it, we kind of said, here's what you're doing, here's what you're not, here's how we can help. Here's what we found that's good, here's what we found that's bad.
Here's your order that you should do it for the
biggest exactly.
And why.
We presented them with, here's your, top 8 priorities. Here's your, here's where you are now. Here are the things that we can do quickly and easily. Here are the things that are very high priority. If we do the things that are high priority that we can do quickly and easily, here's what you would look like in, about 6 months or, a year. And
let's start by getting the Windows 7 machine off the network.
Let's start by building a process for every single one of these controls.
Now, I love that. I love the maturity that you've gone through with your own MSP and talking about these pen tests. Again, that's exploiting vulnerabilities, and CIS, and specifically the CIS benchmarks, are there to lock that down from a preventative state to make sure those pen tests are less successful and less red. Let's be honest, less red is the goal. So with today's topic, transitioning over, we are going to be talking about system services. So the CIS benchmarks for Windows workstations and servers, this is primarily going to be about the workstation today. So there are only 2 CIS benchmarks on the server side regarding print spooler. The rest of the settings you see here today will be about the workstation specifically. So transitioning into that, guys, probably Rob, do you mind just giving a little overview of, I guess, what a system service is, what they're there for, just kind of an overview of what that is?
So in Windows, system services are there to provide functionality all the time, especially if they're enabled. And it could be a network functionality. It could be maybe some system driver that has to communicate with something. They could do a lot of stuff, but they're always running, and they're usually always available to take communications from a network. And they can do a variety of things, most of which people don't care about. Yeah. That's the first thing I want my workstation to turn off, the majority of them.
Yep, and you'll see a lot, like you said, doing things that you don't care about, right? So a lot of what we'll see today in these settings is a lot of them are recommended to be disabled or just not installed completely. So we'll get more into that in a moment. But just like Rob was saying, some of these are in place for specific workflows. If you need to have a specific communication active, there are always scenarios to, go against the CIS benchmarks exceptions that, as you guys were saying, should be documented, policies built around, and segmented off the network if it's that serious. So very cool, guys. Let's dive into the topic with the first slide. I always kick off with a series of MITRE attack techniques that we can kind of just talk through. Again, this list is not inclusive of every single type of attack that may be mitigated through hardening with these CIS benchmarks, but there's some good ones in here. Rob, Steb, do you mind just kind of kicking off and just calling out a couple of these techniques and what they are here?
Cool. I can't see the slide, so Steb, can you make that bigger?
Yeah, certainly can.
Pretty critical.
Well, we could start with a wireless compromise. So unlike a cable, which tends to go from one point to another, wireless is a giant radio that's always listening and always sending out signals. If you are a bad actor and you can hear that radio, you can probably interfere with it in some way, either by sending it malicious content or, like at a radio frequency level, interfering with it. There's a lot of ways to break into systems like that.
And does this include Bluetooth with this type of thing?
Yeah, anyone using a Bluetooth headset like yourself could potentially
Thanks, Rob.
could potentially have people either snooping on their thing, interfering with it, or sometimes even be able to compromise the system if it's a poorly designed system,
And that's another use case. Again, I'm wearing a Bluetooth headset myself. If we did have our systems built without these exceptions, I probably wouldn't be able to talk with such clear audio today. So there are use cases depending on the position. But yeah, no, perfect example.
Yeah.
Let's.
But we're all hardwired here. We appreciate security.
Zach knows I'm pretty careful with my personal security, and I tried using my phone on lockdown mode for a while, which is extremely inconvenient, and I'm really not doing it anymore. But if you want to protect your phone from a wireless attack, that's really the best way to do it. But it is highly inconvenient. I know.
Yeah, and I mean, I like to think about, what happens if you're a business that's running a call center and you have 10,000 employees and you just bought 10,000 Bluetooth headsets.
Yeah.
Are you gonna just turn that off and just say sorry? Whoever bought that, we're not. That was a waste of money. Probably not.
No. So you use the CIS controls to mitigate that risk the best that you can. Right. That's the strategy.
What about some more of these, Rob? I know location tracking is something I can't even do on my work machine. Can't even get into Google Maps. That's definitely annoying if I try to use my work device for personal reasons. But why is that important to make sure you don't have ability for attackers to get that data? I guess.
Well, I mean, a physical breach is instant root, so you don't want people necessarily knowing where you are, because if they get your location, they can get whatever they want. Less paranoid. Any sort of metric out there that you don't want out there is a potential way in. If you have a office you don't want people to know about, I don't mean to sound paranoid, but yeah, you don't want your location out there if you don't need it. Also,
it's all about managing the attack surface, right? You're managing the attack surface ultimately, and these are all vectors.
Did you hear about the one where a exercise like watch thing had location tracking on, and U.S. military bases got identified that were supposed to be secret?
Yep, I did. That was very interesting. Yep.
Say that qualifies as a breach.
A little bit, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, when you have secret training going on some part in the world, and all of a sudden these 6 people are doing laps around the base at 90 miles an hour running.
Not to mention, I know exactly what their patrol routes are.
Oops. Yeah, it's not good.
Not good. Not great.
Not great.
Not a good look.
I kind of hinted at the FTP one on there.
Yeah.
A couple months ago, a company called Move It, which is an FTP server, had an exploit, and I want to say 12,000 companies had all sorts of data taken out of that they're going to have to deal with for the next decade of data loss, proprietary information, person-identified information. It was a huge thing. But again, FTP is one of the few ways to move files around between businesses, so it's hard to lock down.
Yep.
Absolutely. Again, CIS will definitely recommend the security choice, but it's not always the usability choice. Yeah.
Fact.
And here you document it when it's not.
And this was a 0 day, so that was problematic anyway.
One I like on here is just simply malicious notifications, because a lot of these system services is what allows for notifications to pop up, and if they get access to that, they could embed the notification with malware or an executable, get you to click it is all the goal is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you can pop something up, I mean, that's how most ransomware happens, is someone clicks on something that they weren't supposed to, that looked official. Suddenly your whole network's crypto locked.
Let's talk about one more of these. I'll let you choose, and then we'll get a little bit deeper into these slides.
Cool. We'll do SNMP. Great service for monitoring network devices. Completely useless on the workstation nowadays. So, if you got a badly written thing that's whole job is to give internal system information, you're going to have problems.
Yeah, I like to think of all the ones that track devices across the network as like comparing that to the things that you have in your own home. Do you want some stranger, who lives on the other side of town to know that you have $20,000 of your grandmother's jewelry? Probably not.
SNMP
makes it a little bit more attractive.
Yeah.
And given you're here today, Steb, this is a point of view, again, we don't usually have on the series. So these MITRE attack techniques, I mean, these are pretty granular. This is very intense stuff. Do you find yourself ever bringing up specific types of MITRE attack tactics or techniques in customer conversations to help educate or encourage them to use an offering, or is this a little out of scope on the customer end?
No, I mean, we'll talk about, where the risk is, but I'm not specifically calling out MITRE and attack. I think that in a lot of cases, especially on the smaller end of companies, that, they hear MITRE attack and they just kind of go, back to their head. I'm not listening anymore. You're talking nerd to me. Don't talk nerd to me, right?
We're mostly just trying to make sure their secretaries don't buy $1,400 of iTunes gift cards for a scammer. And
yeah, we found it's much more effective to share stories than it is to say, well, listen, MITRE attack technique means.
You did not get an email from your CEO traveling and he needs iTunes gift cards. Did not happen. Please don't send it. Also, that's a real story. That happened.
Yeah, of course.
You can't control what your end clients are buying without telling you. Asset management, I heard, is one of the top 1 and 2 controls of CIS.
That's it.
I generally talk to security professionals that do have that awareness. So we like to get right into it on some of the specifics. But I think your approach is absolutely the best. You need to know your audience, right?
Mm-hmm. That's it.
All right, let's transition more into these topics. And I want to first give the shout out to CIS. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. This is Senteon. This is the catalog of all the CIS settings. And I wanted to emphasize before we got into these settings, CIS does provide some deep dives. If you don't know what something is, you can always click into it, see the description, rationale, and impact. They do have a PDF that's free to download for anyone. Or you can, of course, just get the Senteon catalog in here. And the thing I love to call out before we get to these settings is that you can always, CIS does provide cross mappings. So, Rich, I mean, you can talk towards this. What's the value of knowing where these fit into other regulated frameworks? I mean, why did CIS choose to do that?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. So, organizations have requirements to comply to different frameworks sometimes, or maybe they're trying to follow the NIST framework for regulatory purposes. Many organizations will actually use the Center for Internet Security controls framework as their guide while they're trying to achieve NIST compliance, because we do have that roadmap that's easy to follow, easy to measure, easy to audit, and it's prioritized, which is not the case with the NIST controls in general. So people will like to follow the CIS controls and then just do those mappings to whatever frameworks that they want. And there's detailed mappings out to multiple other frameworks from the self-assessment that you can do yourself using free tooling from CIS, or more advanced tooling through your partners and our Secure Suite memberships that we offer.
Yep.
I think awesome. I touched on that a little bit at the start of this. Comparing the CIS controls versus other frameworks out there. We looked at NIST. NIST is huge. We looked at
they're all good
as well. Yeah, they're all great. But the prioritization piece, is extremely valuable, helping you understand. All right, here's how you lay your foundation, and here's how you build it.
Threat-informed priorities.
Right. Yep. All right. Well, let's hop on into the more technical side of today's discussion. We do have about 10 slides to go over. They are going to be made up of multiple settings per slide. So I did my best to categorize these on my side of the business. So let's dive into this first one: Bluetooth and wireless settings. So we have the settings listed at the bottom. They are all recommended to be set as disabled. But Rob, Steb, do you mind talking to us about what these are and why it's a good idea to have these disabled if possible?
Sure. Well, I'll start at the end of that list. So unless you're using a Bluetooth mobile hotspot, there is no reason to have your system configured to be one. That's just asking for someone to try to route traffic through your system nefariously that somewhere in the coffee shop you're at. Similarly, the support services, again, if you're not using it, why would you have a service listening for, Bluetooth support? Doesn't make any sense. And then the slide went away again, Steb.
That's Henry backstage.
I think that's because we were talking. They moved it over to us. So
It drains your battery too. It's a system performance thing.
very true.
Oh yeah, running any radio is going to drain battery. The audio gateway, again, if you're not using it, why have a protocol available that lets you listen to the microphone on your computer or stream from there? Or it doesn't make sense to have that running if you're not going to be using it.
Yeah, awesome. And we'll leave that slide up so you can see it. But yeah, no, that's a perfect example. Exactly. And what Rich said too, you know, if you're not using it, why have something on the system that's able to take resources? That's just going to decrease runtime. And as we put in the why it matters, increase that attack surface, which again, CIS is all about that preventative, proactive approach, minimizing the blast radius, minimizing that attack surface. All right, let's get into a little bit more exciting one here with network services and protocols. So again, I mean, I hear network services, protocols. I mean, that's intuitively sounds like an entry point to me. Sounds like something an attacker is going to want to exploit. So we have a lot of settings on this screen, but Steb, Rob, take it away.
Well, internet connection sharing is the desktop version of the ability to route traffic through your computer and act as a gateway. So if that is available and you can configure that, again, there's no way you want that as a home user nowadays. It's just asking for someone to be able to route traffic through your computer. There's no reason to do that. The link layer topology discovery is designed to map out complicated networking scenarios on networks, which you don't have in a home or small office setting anyway. And you wouldn't want a desktop doing it nowadays anyway. Switches are supposed to do that sort of thing. No reason to be running that. Similarly, routing and remote access is designed to handle routing and remote access, which you wouldn't be doing on a desktop. You're not going to use it as a router nowadays. We all have little dedicated routers from our ISPs or your corporate routers. You just wouldn't be doing that, you know. Remote procedure calls.
A lot of these are legacy activities, Rob. See, it sounds like there used to be a use case, but there's not anymore in most cases.
Right. And then in a threat scenario, you're just opening yourself up to making it more easier for the bad guys to do what they want.
For stuff that was really handy in 1996 and still needs to be supported for old apps, but your Windows 10 or 11 computer running on a corporate network just doesn't need any of these things anymore.
Now, have you seen any impact with a setting like this within your client base for that supports remote workers?
None of these here on the desktop. Not a single one of these would impact remote workers.
Okay.
I actually had to look up what the simple TCP/IP services are. They're a set of tools that, again, would be really handy in an old school network because you could pop up a message on someone's screen over the network just to see if it was working. Yeah. I never even heard of half of them. There's no reason for that nowadays, you know. None of the things listed here impact supportability, remote access, at least on a desktop. No reason for any of these things.
Now, I want to make sure I call out these last three here. You already mentioned TCP/IP, but computer browser, SNMP. The CIS recommends these to be disabled or not installed, while the other ones are just disabled. So I just want to make sure it's very clear here to the audience that some of these programs or features by default aren't even on the system. So if you were to, say, run an evaluation with Senteon or do your investigation on some endpoints and found them installed, that means someone intentionally did that at some point in time, and it probably doesn't have a place anymore. So going back to that cyber hygiene, keeping things cleaned up and up to date.
Yep, I've seen computer browser on systems, but
what does that mean, Rob? You know, I use Chrome. Do I need that?
Well, that's not what that browser word means in this scenario. So before Active Directory, that would be how you would find like shared resources on a network. Yep. But since everyone runs Active Directory nowadays, you would just query Active Directory to find resources. In a home network, you might use it, but probably not. But in a corporate network with Active Directory, no reason for it. It's doing something that needed to be done before Active Directory came on the scene in the late 90s. Same with SNMP. That's trying to query a system to figure out what resources it has or what operating system it is, which is great if you don't have other third-party tools managing that, and really horrifying if you have every desktop telling everyone what it is and what's installed on it and how it's doing.
Spot on. All right, let's get into this next one here. Location and map services. And, we did share a good story of this when we were talking about the MITRE attack tactics. But, these are the specific settings that would help mitigate the risk of that happening. Steb, Rob, do you have more to add on these couple settings?
Well, my desktop computer is 50 pounds, and downloading maps on it seems not like a good idea. It's just the last device I would try to look up where I am on.
Yeah, and I don't personally want to be looking at a laptop in my lap while I'm trying to drive to the local Starbucks.
Yeah, it's not recommended.
I have a phone for that.
I've used a tablet to navigate in Europe. Location services were great. I needed to download maps. Every other scenario, probably not necessary.
Yeah. So if you are traveling and it is a tablet, maybe create a temporary exception group, document it, get rid of it when you're home.
I like that, Zach.
Yep. All right. Not too much to talk about on this slide. So let's go on over to more exciting web and FTP services. So this is another category where they are recommended to be disabled or not installed. So talk to us about this.
Well, on a standard configured workstation, you 99.999% of the time do not need to be serving web pages. So having IIS installed or the admin service would be silly. There are other ways on corporate networks to transfer files that aren't FTP. I would be really interested to know why someone's got FTP on their desktop. Probably not going to happen. And I guess the World Wide Web publishing service, if you're not a web developer, well, even if you are a web developer, you'd have to be one that has a local setup on their desktop to troubleshoot. And again, make an exception group for web developers. But if you're not a web developer, you don't need any of these things.
So let's say you are a web developer. In your environment, or if a client needed that, how would you guys go about creating that exception and being able to track it and making sure it was needed? Do you guys have a process? I know you're talking about processes and outlining it. Is this something you guys have in place, or an idea of how you'd handle it if you did need to have this?
If someone managed to argue me into needing this, which I would fight against, because I would rather give them a server that has these things and then have them develop on the development server. If somehow they won that conversation, which
Rob, do you lose conversations with your clients?
Yeah. Yeah, we would have to create an exception, but I wouldn't be happy about it.
Sure. And going into that documentation side of the business, I know this is getting more and more talked about with regulators and compliances requiring you to outline the exact risk you're accepting. Where would you guys go about documenting that exception if you had that? Do you guys have a single source? Is this on a per setting basis? How does that look today?
I don't know how we do that. That's more your thing, Steb.
Yeah,
I'm gonna let you talk for a minute.
we do it. Yeah, we have a single source for documentation.
Yep, very cool. So, all right, let's get into peer-to-peer networking services. And this was actually one of the MITRE attack tactics that we didn't get to talk about was peer-to-peer network exploitation. So let's learn a little bit about these settings, because this does sound a little scary if you do have these enabled.
Right. Well, in corporate environments, we use a client-server model instead of a peer-to-peer model, because that lets all the information go through central logged systems and not clients talking to each other, which could be anything. So for a company perspective, you want stuff going through the central systems and not clients talking to each other. That said, for attack reasons, clients being able to talk to each other, not through the network or specifically through the core stuff, just sounds scary. I would not want that. Also, again, this is not 1996. We don't need peer-to-peer networks. We have plenty of bandwidth. It's fine.
And help me understand these communication pathways. Is this referring to the blast radius of a ransomware attack, for example? Would this reduce the blast radius? Is this completely unrelated? What do these communication pathways really mean?
This means that desktops can talk to each other without a centralized communication path. And if one workstation isn't able to access something, but another is, and they can talk to each other, then yeah, that could dramatically increase the blast radius of an attack, especially if there's no centralized server, being a traffic manager for that sort of traffic. I guess my dog's leaving the call. My bad.
It was great having Ian here while we could.
Yeah, he had other stuff to do apparently.
It's like, you guys are talking ransomware, I'm out.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fine.
He's got trauma from his days as an InfoSec guy.
Yeah.
You'll have to post the images of him wearing his headset. Those I'm curious to see. So
Usually he creates holes instead of fills them up, but that's a different thing. So anyway, yeah, it's just this sort of stuff is just not needed in a modern network. We don't use that sort of model of communication anymore. We have servers, we have central data centers. They're way better than client-to-client communications are going to be anyway. It's just not needed. Wouldn't want it.
So what is interesting information, though, if you do, obviously you don't want to have this enabled for all of those reasons and more probably, but if you do determine that these settings are enabled, that's also something you want to really investigate at that point because, it's probably either an error or malicious behavior. And it would be good to know which side of the fence that falls on.
Yeah, this would stand out to me as something to look into. Is
right on.
I can't remember seeing these enabled in recent memory.
Yep.
And I will note from my experience, I have seen some of these enabled. So
no.
it is out there in the wild, guys. Definitely not a topic to just overlook and assume you have secure. It's very important to do your vulnerability scans or evaluation with Senteon, using tools that are going to call these out at scale so you know where that risk is and can remediate it.
Yeah, I would argue that if you found that enabled, it's not enough just to flip the switch. You need to really figure out the origin of that change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, now I know this next topic might get a little bit longer with some stories, so please take your time on it because remote access and desktop services, that's the name of the MSP game, isn't it? So talk to us about this and the potential risks of creating business disruption, or rather operational disruption, if you do have all these enabled. Are there ones that we're going to need enabled for your business? So
that sort of depends. I'm going to talk about everything except remote desktop services and remote registry. So all of the systems or services except those two really belong on a server. A lot of these are for a server whose job it is to take remote access and divvy it out between other systems or other sessions within itself, and they don't belong on a workstation. And the remote desktop services, if you're an MSP and you have a remote management system, that probably has a different method of remote access that isn't RDP, and you should be using that and not RDP. That said, if remote users are coming in and trying to access maybe like an engineering workstation on site from remotely, it might be a good idea to have that enabled, but probably behind a VPN or remote gateway. But if you're not remoting into a system, there's no reason for that.
And especially those smaller companies where, let's say that they have a large number of engineering staff, but they're still a relatively small company. Can be a little bit cost prohibitive for them to buy two, massive powerhouse towers as opposed to buying a, rinky-dink little thin client or, basic PC that is only used, to remote into that powerful workstation at the office when they're working remotely.
Yep. And then remote registry, again, if you're an MSP, you probably have a system that can implement changes on all workstations in an environment. However, remote registry is the Windows built-in way to do that, as long as you have credentials. But also on the flip side of that, the functionality part is if you're an attacker and you can remotely edit someone's registry, which is the core, the thing that controls what computers do, that's probably a bad thing.
Yeah, you're, from my perspective, you're opening an unnecessary hole within the attack surface, and
Oh no,
man down.
Oh.
We lost Rich. Rich, no, not Rich.
Like Star Fox, Falco, no.
So someone probably remotely edited his camera position on the registry, and this is what happens.
It doesn't even look like he's coming back.
Uh,
Rich, you're all good. We'll let you fix that up.
Oh my! That was my cat. One of my cats joining the live stream by knocking my webcam off my monitor. So thank
talk
you.
about a bad actor.
Yeah, it sounds like a bad actor to me.
This
Can
is
you
where
see
the
him?
phrase physical access's root comes from.
That's him saying, "Yeah, I did that, and I'll do it again. I don't care."
It's like, listen, Dad, you had a dog on the show. What's that all about?
Exactly.
We're trying to get balanced opinions here.
We found
Anyway.
his weakness. Dog on the show, taking me out.
So,
I
in
got
summary,
one
have
more.
you used remote registry on companies that didn't have a way to manage it otherwise? Yes. Would it have been better to have a different, more secure system? Also, yes.
So I got one more question on this slide before we get over, and we do have about 4 more topics to go over in the last 15 minutes, so we'll keep it to a couple minutes each. But you talked about an RMM or using other solutions in order to remote in. Have you ever seen a scenario where one of these recommendations had to be enabled in order for that third-party tool to actually work? So where a recommendation like this would actually inhibit that other software from performing correctly?
Yeah, not this specific one, but if you had it more generalized to all, or free, some of them use a BSD licensed free solution to come in. Yeah, you'd have to make an exception to allow, say, VNC or something, depending on what RMM solution you have.
But nothing with these. So very cool.
And with these specifically, although there are RMM solutions that use RDP and proxied off of the server network.
I was going to bring up before the
Attack.
the attack I experienced that Senteon, you guys do remote access, and this is where you provide a higher level of security through the use of an agent. And a lot of secure solutions will use that agent that, there's always a mixed dialogue about. But what that agent is really doing is protecting you from having to open some of these holes in your system with, a secure way of communicating.
Exactly right. So
yes, moving the edge of your network to a company whose job it is to secure that instead of an office grade firewall.
Absolutely. All right, very cool. Let's dive into the next one with administrative and specialized services. This intuitively makes me think of settings the engineers might need. But again, the recommendation here, all disabled or not installed completely. Could you talk to us about a little bit on this?
Sure. So I looked up a couple of these, and what a lot of these are for is ability for workstation to talk to, say, like a firewall and have it open ports for it in a really easy way, which is great for home networks, awful for corporate networks. As for the LXSS manager, that is part of a toolkit to be compatible with Unix, which most workstations are probably not trying to get compatibility that direction.
I will say that does come up a lot in our onboardings. A lot of engineers do sometimes have this installed, and they do want to keep it so they can keep on doing some of their workflows. But like you said, Rob, typically general end client, it's not going to be there.
Probably not. And then having it an open SSH server on Windows desktop, I would really want to hear someone's defense of that. There are a lot of other solutions that aren't open SSH. It's a great protocol for Linux. I use it to talk to servers, but I would not want it on my desktop or anyone else's desktop for that matter.
Hackers love it.
Depends which side of the field you're talking to here.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. And again, I know we're coming close on time, so let's go over to this next setting with event and error reporting services. So again, I mentioned this at the beginning. Print Spooler here is a recommendation on servers as well to have this disabled. Rob, I'm not sure if your MSP dealt with the Print Nightmare situation a couple of years ago, but so that setting directly relates to that, and it is now a CIS benchmark. As we talked about, these are always improving, always updating. So hence why it's made the list. So talk to us a little bit about this.
So, well, print spooling is going to be complicated because some companies do need to print.
Absolutely.
Shipping needs to print labels. Quality needs to print those cool little QR code to track product as it goes across. Office workers tend to like printing for some reason. I don't know why. It doesn't. Why do they do it? Anyway, every other system doesn't need to print. So there are security workarounds for the print nightmare thing that we had to put in on the systems that had to print. But if all we had to worry about was the, I don't know, couple print servers and, you know, workstations that actually had to print, that would have been a way smaller window for us to both repair and also to worry about being compromised versus the, you know, either tens or thousands, depending on the environment, of computers that never print that for some odd reason had this running on it.
Spot on.
As for the Windows Event Collector, which is the other one I wanted to talk about, it turns out that is to collect events and errors from other systems and then report on it, which you would not be doing on a desktop. You'd want that on a server.
Spot on. Yeah, and I love that you said you're outlining the machines and servers that actually need that ability. That's something that we try to, I get the question a lot. Should I manage Senteon through multiple different group baselines within one business, or should I create one baseline and manage by exception? I think really the way we would recommend is to have that single group baseline, that target option of what you want, and then just create your exceptions underneath it. Easier tracking, and if you need to just delete an exception group, it's much easier than editing an entire group.
Plus, an exception group is called print servers.
Exactly. You know exactly what it's there for instead of just a random another group name. So
back to your favorite term, Zach, which is minimizing the blast radius, right?
I do love that term. Spot on here. All right, we talked about this next section here a little bit at the start, but push notifications and update services. So I know we talked about notifications, you know, fake malware embedded notifications, but update services is interesting. I know MSPs everywhere are pushing, you know, their RMM updates, they're deploying updates through that. Are these related to that, or is this something completely different?
None of these are related to the Microsoft update or RMM's update service. And the last one, the Windows push to install, is actually for a remote install of Microsoft Store applications, none of which are critical to an underlying system. So no reason for that. I literally can't think of a reason to do that.
And they don't want to do it themselves. You don't want to just push it out and have that ability just accessible for whatever reason.
On a desktop level, I would.
No,
I can't think of a reason to do that. We really need to have FreeCell installed on every single computer. Better.
I think that's a perfect segue to our last section.
I think solitaire is actually people playing solitaire on their work machines is how Microsoft powers their data centers.
That's probably accurate. Yeah.
They've actually figured out renewable energy. It's solitaire.
Like a hamster wheel. I hit mines in Minesweeper all the time. That's still a popular game on my computer. So
you got to minimize that blast radius, Zach.
Sorry, guys. All right.
What's that Zach's for? The exception list.
Zach's exception. So, all right, let's hop into this last section as we do talk about gaming, because we are all nerds in this room. Gaming and entertainment services. So this is a lot about Xbox, as we know, Microsoft company. So let's get into this. And other than the operational reasons, we probably don't want your end clients and employees being on Xbox servers. You know, why would we want to disable this?
Well, for productivity reasons, if you're not a game development studio, you don't want any of this going on.
No.
But also, if all of this is talking back to Microsoft servers about gaming stuff, and you know how gamers are, that's a lot of potential entries into your system for something that you're, unless you're a gaming studio, probably not using.
No, there's no reason for it, you know, and here at the Center for Internet Security, we don't allow applications to be installed on machines. Like if I wanted to install some of this stuff, I mean, I would get a notice real fast that just says, contact your administrator. And then I would have to make that reasonable argument why it was important for me to have a gaming system on my work laptop. And I don't
Easy
know.
battle.
I don't know. I
Easy
guess
conversation.
you could try to have that argument, but no.
Well, I got lucky personally because I asked Rob, can I please install Goat Simulator 3 on my work machine? But the rationale was it's also my personal machine and I own it, so I was able to do that.
We did all play My Summer Car one time as a fun team building experience.
I'm a big fan of VMs. I use my Mac has all kinds of VMs for everything, and I put all that stuff in separate VMs generally, personally.
So, Steb, you brought up going to this next slide. I put a little just Q&A questions for us to talk about with the last few minutes. But talking about remote work, a little blurry, I can make that bigger. But remote work, personal machines being used for work, I mean, that's not unheard of. MSP's typical client size, is less than 100 employees, less than 20 employees probably. They may not even have an office. So having that work and personal machine, how do you balance and figure out what the right baseline is for those clients? Is it just follow these recommendations, disable it all, see who gets upset? Is it a conversation? I mean, how does that look? How do you manage this?
Yeah, I think it has to be a conversation. Ultimately, we don't want to be managing people's personal devices. And so really the client has to decide whether or not they're willing to assume that type of risk. If they are, well, you've assumed that risk. You made the choice. These are our recommendations. You can either choose security or choose risk. So
ease of use. Yeah. I mean, I recommend
either out of the network or on its own Wi-Fi. And if they're out of the network, then our controls come into play once they come in with whatever path in they have. Could be RDP or VPN or whatever, but they're still quarantined outside the network because they're not controlled by us.
And don't connect to public Wi-Fi ever.
No, never. Yeah.
Just facts.
Do you want to share your information with other computers on this network? No, never.
Nope. Please no.
Yeah.
There is a question from Chad. I don't know if people saw that.
If you can bring that up on the screen, Cliff, in the background.
It's a long one.
Oh, it is a long one. Maybe too long for the screen, but let me give it a read. So for the odd use case when any of these given services might need to be in use and some ideas of how to secure them as best as possible, such as network segmentation, ACLs, in different network sizes, no firewall, edge, firewall. Chad, you went deep, man.
Yeah, thank you. Those are good comments. Thank you.
It is great comments. So I guess overall the question is, how do you deal with those exceptions and use cases where you do need to accept some of these system services to be in place?
It depends on the size of the client, and I know it depends isn't a great answer to that question. But if a client has the ability to have VLANs and other network segmentation, of course, we've had to do it before for phone servers that have either an external vendor has to manage it, or it's running services we don't really want running, like FTP. We'll quarantine its own little VLAN, give it its own firewall rule, and then if something goes wrong on that network, yell at the vendor. Other scenarios like web developers, sometimes you just got to accept that and crank up the antivirus on their system just because they have more exposure. It depends on what tools you got and what they're trying to do. And if it's a web development house, well, 50% of the computers have web development stuff on them, so not as big of a thing. If you got one, well, crank down that.
Separate it.
Yeah.
And I'm curious from the MSP perspective, would you as a business owner, every MSP wants to grow their business. That's the name of the game. Is there scenarios where you would possibly turn down a customer because they want to have personal and work machines being the same? Or is this part of your onboarding process where you're like, hey, you really need to have dedicated work machines. We can't work with you. How does that look from the MSP perspective?
I have turned down clients that didn't have enough infrastructure to have dedicated work computers, because it's just impossible to manage, And also when larger clients have people try to bring those exceptions in, it's a hard conversation we have to have, and it comes down to me telling them as a trusted advisor, in that book in there, you don't want to take on this legal responsibility. You don't want to legally be responsible for that personal computer as your company. And now imagine my company. We really don't want to do it.
No, we allow BYOD for phones only. Not, I mean, I would love to use my Mac as a BYOD device for my work at CIS, but it's not allowed.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And we've also mitigated this with policy and sort of kind of like how Rich, you said you guys have you have to request that you download an application. Well, we'll do the same thing with remote work. If you want to remote work, or if you want one of your employees to do remote work, you have to request this. And then these are the rules that you have to follow if that's something that you want to do. So that if there is an exception, at least through policy, we're helping to.
And you can document it, and you can defend against that exception through defense in depth techniques.
Defending against your decisions is critical, especially in today's world where every breach is needing to be, go to the press. You got to announce it. You need to do the post-mortem. You need to possibly go to court. So being able to defend all these choices is critical, and it's only becoming more critical. All right, we are right at that hour point. So Steb and Rob, thank you for being here. I do want to give you, another minute to yourselves. Is there any just kind of closing thoughts that you want to leave us on this topic of system services?
All you, Steb.
Don't things you don't need.
There we go. Closing thought. And disabled stuff you don't need.
Absolutely. Now, spot on, guys. Thank you so much for being the guest this week. Me and Rich are here every single week. We aim for every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. So next week, we will be talking about the ever-loving firewalls. Always in place, depending how you manage them, whether it's through GPO directly or another tool, firewalls are typically there. So we'll have Sandra here to talk about that. Then we'll be getting into advanced audit policy and a little bit of a lapse topic with Jimmy later on in October. So we do have a CIS Unlocked benchmark series newsletter. This is going to be in-depth slides on each setting we talked about today without the commentary. It will have a link to this though. So it will be in-depth for your engineers to learn about these settings individually. So thank you all for coming. Always connect with us on LinkedIn. Me and Rich are very active. And if you did want to give Senteon a whirl, we do have a QR code on this last slide. Happy to have you on board. So thank you, everyone. And we will talk next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.